Well, he is risen. Well done. And because he's risen, I've got some really good news for you today. Whether or not you are a follower of Jesus for a long time or far from Jesus and not sure what you believe at all, it is the great invitation that we get to celebrate every Easter. And it's this: because he's risen, we can quit religion. So I'm going to actually invite us to say this all together on the count of three. And let's say it like this is a great, good piece of news for every single one of us, because it really, really is. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Because he's risen, we can quit religion. Exactly. Here's what I mean when I'm saying religion. It's something that if you grew up like me, it's something that you can resonate with. If you grew up kind of in really any home at all with a person who was spiritual in your life, you will resonate with some of the stories that probably you'll hear today. Religion is a set of beliefs that are built on rules, rituals, and rejection. And so many of us grew up in homes like this, right, where life was built around and our faith and religion was built around rules, right? So just nod your head if you kind of remember feeling this way as you were growing up as a kid. Obey the rules and God will love you. Anybody kind of remember that? Obey the rules and God will love you. Well, here's the problem with that, right? Everyone has different rules. Have you noticed that? It's kind of nuts when you think about it. I grew up in a home where one of the rules that we had was that you were not allowed to watch cartoons on Saturday morning, all right? How many of us would agree that that's really hard for an 8-year-old kid who just wants to see his Power Rangers, right? It's a tough deal. I remember going to my grandma and being like, "Grandma, can I watch cartoons?" And she'd say, "No, this is the Lord's Day." And I was like, I don't know if I can believe in a God that won't let me watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I don't know if I can deal with that. And here's what's tough about rules, right? Everyone has different rules. You had rules growing up in your house. Everyone has different rules. Those rules seem to change, and it seems like the people that make up the rules end up breaking the rules anyway. You notice how that kind of works out. And if you grow up with a life full of rules, sometimes it can just become so exhausting. The second one is this: rituals. Do these things and God will love you. Do these things and God will love you. Go to church, serve in this place, write this amount of money on a check, do these certain things, and God is going to come through for you. But here's what we know, right? For some of us, you did your job, but God seemingly didn't do his, right? You followed the rules. You did everything that was expected of you. You prayed the prayer. You asked for certain things. And all of a sudden, when it seemed like you would need God most, it didn't seem like God showed up. And for many of us, the reason why we've walked away from faith is because of ridiculous rituals that ended up not working the way that everybody told us they were going to work. Or maybe this is the one that I resonate with, is this kind of the religion of rejection, right? Deny your desires, your doubts, and your logic. Just believe. Now, I grew up with my grandmother, spending summers with my grandma. She's an incredible woman. I love her so much. And I remember growing up in church, and like the services were very, very long, like 3-hour services. I had to wear a suit every single Sunday. There was no air conditioning. This was in South Florida. It was an incredible place with incredibly kind people, just a different kind of cultural reality. And I remember kind of sitting in church, and like the first lady would get up, like the first lady, so you guys know, for some of us who are not brown, the first lady is the wife of the pastor, all right, in case you were wondering, what is that? Not like Michelle Obama wasn't at our church, all right? It was a different deal. And they would get up and they would read the announcements, right? And the announcements would go like something like this, pray for Sister Tanya, her marriage is in shambles, like that kind of thing. And you're like, gosh, I feel bad for Tanya right now. I don't know if she's coming back, right? And I remember just kind of growing up like with this idea in some ways that science and God could not go together, that logic and God couldn't go together. And as a result of that, you had to reject certain things that just seemed to make sense in order to keep your faith. And let's be real, at some point, we just can't pretend anymore, right? At some point, the stories that seem impossible to believe don't resonate with the rest of our adult life. That what worked for us as children don't work for us anymore as adults. That our childhood religion doesn't work in our adult reality. Maybe for you, it was in a biology class when there was a way that you grew up thinking that the world was created in the way in which things happen, and then you could see it, you could feel it, you could study it, and it just did not jive with what you had heard growing up. Or maybe it was you were in an English class and somebody pulled one little stack out of this house of cards when it came to the Bible, and all of a sudden the Bible kind of fell apart. And to be honest with you, you kind of wanted the Bible to fall apart because you were in college and you wanted to do whatever you wanted to do anyway, and it was just an easier thing to know that maybe I don't have to believe believe in the Bible as much. And at some point, when we're told over and over and over again, you have to reject what you can see with your very own eyes right in front of you, it just seems like religion becomes a prison that you can't live in. And at some point, you just got to be honest. Because you can't, look here. You can't believe in something you don't actually believe, can you? Like, we've all tried to believe something that we just don't believe, and that's the way that belief works. And so look at me. If the reason why you left faith, why you've walked away from faith, or why you're considering walking away from faith has to do with something with rules, has to do with something about rituals, or has to do with something that you just have to reject internally, I want you to know today, you have made the right choice. The best decision you can make is walk away from religion. You have made the right choice, and Jesus thinks so too. In fact, what we celebrate on Easter Sunday is the fact that Jesus' resurrection, this historically verifiable, this historically documented, this historically accountable, not just a little fairy tale that we grew up with kids, Jesus' resurrection is an invitation to all of us to quit religion. And it's not something that we have to just close our eyes and try to believe really hard. It's something that we have to wrestle with. That there is evidence surrounding the resurrection that you have to wrestle down to the ground. And if you're intellectually honest, I would submit to you, it is harder to not believe the resurrection happened than it is to believe that it did not. In fact, if you just look at the way in which the New Testament was written by men who knew Jesus, walked with Jesus, but were fishermen, some of them not educated at all. Some of them had to become fishermen because they got kicked out of rabbi school, meaning every Jewish boy would go through rabbi school until they turned 13. And if they weren't smart enough, they'd get kicked out. And these guys got kicked out, which meant they did not know the Old Testament. Are you tracking with me? Like, imagine if you stopped in 7th grade. Think about all the stuff you wouldn't learn. They did not know the Old Testament, yet they wrote the accounts and the narratives of the life of Jesus as eyewitnesses. And in their storyline, there are 300, look at me, 300 prophecies that were written about Jesus in the Old Testament that most of these guys weren't even educated enough to know about, that they wrote about and said happened in the life of Jesus, and all 300 of them happened hundreds of years before on different continents. You've got to wrestle that one to the ground. And beyond that, you've got to wrestle down to the ground the statistical improbability of that even happening. In fact, some people have done research and shown that for just 8 of the prophecies, the kind of major ones that were written about Jesus in the Old Testament, for them to happen in the New, the potential of that happening is 1 times 10 to the 17th power, all right? Now, I'm not like the brightest guy in the world, but I'll tell you this, and maybe you would agree. If you went to your Bank of America app tomorrow morning and what you had in your account was multiplied times 10 to the 17th power, how many of us would be saying, thank you, Jesus, right? Like you would be, right? The statistical probability of Jesus accomplishing just 8 of the things that were prophetically said about him hundreds of years before would be as if you went to the state of Texas and you doused the entire state of Texas in 2 feet of silver dollars. You marked one of those silver dollars with a smiley face. You dropped somebody in the middle of the state of Texas and said, you've got one shot to pick up the coin that has the smiley face on it. It is more statistically probable that Jesus is who he says he is than it is improbable that he was not. And you've got to wrestle that one down to the ground, because to believe in Jesus' resurrection changes everything. And to deny it, it means that your life and the way that it's lived, you have the freedom to do whatever you want. But if you're intellectually honest, you got to do some work before you can get there. On top of that, the guys who wrote the New Testament, these documents that make up the second half of what we call the Bible, that tell the story and the narratives of the person of Jesus, these guys were all cowards who were not believers themselves. And here's what I mean by that. When Jesus is crucified by Rome, which history verifies happened, none of his followers, except for John, who was taking care of his mama, stayed at the cross. They all scattered and ran away. No one was at the cross, and nobody was expecting nobody 3 days later at the tomb, because when a man gets crucified, you know what happens when they throw him in a tomb? he stays dead. No one was expecting Jesus to do this. And so all of these guys run away. They're not with Jesus. They abandon him and go back to their everyday lives. And yet we've got to deal with the fact that within months, if not years, of Jesus' supposed resurrection, which we believe is verifiable, all of those guys that were scared to even admit they knew Jesus died terrible deaths, not because they were teaching that Jesus was a good teacher or because he was a nice rabbi or he was a good man, but because they were declaring that they saw Jesus rise from the dead. And you got to wrestle that to the ground. Mark was hanged and he was dragged behind a chariot. Luke was thrown into the sea to drown. John, who was Jesus' best friend, was abandoned on an island. And before he was abandoned on an island, he was boiled alive, all right? How many of us would agree, no matter what kind of excuse you need to make, if somebody said, just give it up, you'd say, all right, I give it up when I see the boiling pot, right? Like, I'm not trying to be somebody's lobster, right? Like, that was John's reality. The man was boiled alive and then thrown to rot away and waste on an island. Peter, the guy who denied knowing Jesus to a middle school girl on the day that he was crucified because he was so stressed out, would stand up a couple of days later in the city of Jerusalem where Jesus was crucified, stand up and say, you killed him, we saw him rise, so say you're sorry. And thousands of people would abandon the Jewish traditions of their past and say yes to following Jesus, and the city of Jerusalem was flipped on its head. And Peter, who denied Jesus to a middle school girl, would end up being crucified upside down. Paul, who was one of the wealthiest men during that time and era, one of the most highly educated men. He was a Roman citizen and a Jewish elite. He was decapitated by Rome, not because he thought Jesus was a good teacher, but because he said Jesus rose from the dead. And here's my personal favorite, James. James was stoned to death. But here's another thing you need to know about James. James was the little brother, the half-brother of Jesus. And if you're unconvinced yet, let's just be real for a minute, okay? What would it take for you to be convinced that your older brother was your king and Lord? For James, it was that he saw his brother dead, and then he saw his brother rise. And for Matthew, a wealthy man of privilege and power, more money than many of us would know what to do with. Matthew, he would be stabbed to death. The same men who denied knowing Jesus would die terrible, horrific deaths and abandon everything because they were unwilling to admit and unwilling to recant when they said, I've seen him alive. Here's the thing. The only reason why you're willing to suffer this kind of death, the only reason why you're willing to give up your family and give up your wealth and give up your comfort and go all around the world telling people about this carpenter and rabbi from Israel, the only reason you'd be willing to do that, and every single one of them would be willing to do that, is if you saw someone rise from the dead. You got to wrestle down this resurrection. Matthew invites us and reminds us that Jesus' invitation is to quit on religion and to pick up something so much more life-giving. This is Jesus' words recorded by Matthew 11. Jesus says, are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out on religion? Then come to me. Get away with me and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. Jesus' invitation is to a life of rest and freedom, not rituals and rules. And I am so sorry that people that do what I do, people that stand on platforms like I do for decades and decades and decades, from the time that we were little kids, forced on us rules and rituals and said, that's how God is going to love you, when Jesus says the direct opposite. That the life he invites us into is a life of freedom, a life of rest, and a life of joy. Luke, who was a medical doctor, Luke, who was a scientist by trade, and also an investigative journalist, spent a good portion of his career interviewing eyewitnesses who had known Jesus in Israel. In fact, he interviewed some people who had actually hated Jesus and didn't believe in what Jesus was saying, and then became followers of Jesus after they saw him resurrected. He compiles all of this information around the eyewitnesses to put together what he calls a highly ordered account of the life of Jesus. And in that account, in that narrative, in that historically verifiable document, Luke records a story that Jesus tells that I think is such a great image and picture of what it means to be somebody who walks away from religion and walks into a relationship with Jesus. There's some rich people and some very, very powerful people that don't like Jesus. There's some religious people who really, really don't like Jesus. And there are some party people who are pretty intrigued by him. And it's in this setting, kind of think about a party situation, if you will. It's in a public setting where you've got highly religious people. And if you're struggling to think about who a highly religious person is, think about that person that posts on your Facebook all that stuff that makes you just cringe every time you see it. You know, it's like do less, you know, like that kind of person. And you're like, man, I don't know anyone like that. It's probably because you are the person, all right? You just need to stop it, all right? Think about the most religious people you know, the ones who pretend like everything's awesome and they're really quick to be judgmental of you. That group is at the conversation, those people are at the table. And then think about your happy hour crowd. Like these people are fun, like they're always up for anything, but they're also probably made some decisions that they regret. The religious people can't stand the happy hour people, and the happy hour really don't even care about what the religious people are thinking, because religious people think that people care when they don't actually care. You know what I'm saying? Those people are there, and Jesus is in the middle of it all. And somebody asked Jesus a question: who's going to get in to the kingdom of heaven? Who's going to get God's love? Who's going to earn God's favor? And Jesus tells two stories, and then he gives a third story where he really puts it all together. It's the story that we call the prodigal son, even though I would say the better name or title for the story is the story of the good father. And the story goes this way, that there's a younger brother who wants all of the stuff that his father has, doesn't love his dad at all, but just wants his inheritance. And in that culture, in that time, your father has to die for you to be able to get your inheritance. So he essentially goes to his father and says, Dad, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm really not interested in a relationship with you. I just want the stuff that belongs to me when you die. And because he was the younger brother, it'd be a third of the father's total estate. And he said, I just want a third of my estate now. Just give it to me now. Let's not pretend like we like each other. I'm going to go live my life and do my stuff. Give me the money. And you might be hearing this right now thinking, my gosh, like I couldn't imagine a child saying that. Like I've got two boys, right? And I struggle to give my kids like a third of my sandwich right now. Like I couldn't imagine like what it would be like to just give them a third of the estate. And so the rich, the people who are religious are hearing this story and they're thinking, oh my gosh, like what a terrible younger brother. Surely the father's going to put him in his place. And instead, the father says yes and gives the younger brother his resources. And the younger brother just goes out and he parties like crazy, you know. He gets a private jet and he brings his buddies together and they fly to Vegas and they spend their money on, women and on booze and on, all types of different things. They just gamble it all away and they just wreck their life and they have a ton of fun while they're doing it. But then an economic downturn happens. This parable was actually written in 2009, in case you were wondering. That's when it was written. And this guy doesn't have access now to any of his wealth. He's lost it all. All the women are gone. All the booze has dried up. He's pretty hungover. And he's like, I need a job somewhere. And so he finds a job where he can find a job, which is basically working at a pig pen, which to people in that culture would have been the worst job ever because pigs were seen as unclean. And so now he's in this situation where he's apart from his dad, he has nothing, and he says to himself, man, it would be better for me to just walk back to my dad's house, admit that I had messed up, and just be a servant in his home. I don't expect him to restore me, just be a servant. And so while the son is a long way off, we see in the story that the father is sitting on the porch, and he sees his son while his son is still at a far distance. And at this point, the religious people who are listening to Jesus tell the story are thinking, that's right, Jesus, show these rabble-rousers, show the happy hour crowd how this ends. The father stands on the porch. The son walks up. He's got to grovel and ask for forgiveness, and the father's going to say no because he burned his bridge, he didn't follow the rules, and the son deserves what's coming to him. They're ready. They're ready for Jesus to do what every religious person has done up to that point. And instead, Jesus says that the father gets up from his porch and he runs full speed to embrace his son. And in Middle Eastern culture, for a man to run, it would have been the worst sign. It is a thing that men do not do. And I kind of understand that idea of men not running. The Bible actually says in Proverbs that any person who is running is fleeing from something because they're evil. So all of you guys who run for fun, I don't trust you at all. So the father, big beard, hikes up his clothes and he runs after his son and he gives him an embrace. And the happy hour crowd right now is blown away by this idea. Like if you could imagine if this was a rap battle, the happy hour crowd's like, oh, like that's where they are. The father embraces the son, puts a ring on his finger, a robe over his neck and says, welcome home, son, you are restored. Kill the fatted calf. We're having a party tonight. There's another brother in the story. And this brother doesn't love his father either. This brother just wants what his father can give him, but he's learned over time if you just do the right things the right way, you keep in the rules and you say yes when you're supposed to say yes and do what you're told to do, everything will work out and you're going to get loved eventually, and that's the way to do it. And he gets really irritated when he finds out that his younger brother has been restored back to the family, because now that means that estate that of 2/3, right, that belongs to him is now cut in half. So not only did his younger brother leave him to do all the work like most younger siblings do, but now he's not only done that, but on top of that, he's now going to get half of everything that was due him. And the older brother is fuming. He's upset. Because there's a big party going on for the younger brother, and nobody throws a party for the big brother, and I've done everything good my whole life. And here's the thing about that brother, is that brother's religious too, because he's thought that earning his way would be what would give him what he needs. And the question that everybody has to ask whenever you read a story that Jesus lays out is these three questions. Who am I? Who is God? And what's the point? Who am I? Who is God? And what's the point? Well, who am I? It's the question you've got to ask today. Are you the younger brother? Maybe you grew up like me and you had a season in your life where you thought, my gosh, the rules are way too hard and they're not fun to keep anyway. This is going to be an impossible thing for me to figure out. I may as well just quit playing the game, quit trying, and just run and do my own thing. Let me go pursue the life that I want to live. And really what you are pursuing is the religion of running. Running away from God, because at the end of the day, there's something in the back of your mind that knows he's there, that knows he's pursuing you. And you try to fill your life with everything you possibly can. But you got the promotion and it didn't make things better. You moved into the neighborhood and the neighborhood didn't make things better. You thought if you could just make a little bit more or have a couple nicer things, that your marriage would be better, but your marriage is still in a bad place and you're not even sure if you like your kids. Or maybe you find yourself as the older brother, just earning. Like you've got these rules and rituals, and gosh, you do everything that's necessary. You give what you're supposed to give. You serve where you're supposed to serve. You go where you're supposed to go. You say what you're supposed to say. And at the end of it, you just feel empty because you don't even feel like it's worth it anymore. And look at me. You don't like your marriage either, and you're really not even sure if you like your kids either too. And you find yourself in this place where God says there's a party going on, and you find yourself not invited, not invested, not involved. See, some of us today, if we're honest, man, we've been running. We have been running from the love of our Father because we thought we could do it on our own. For some of us, I would even argue for some of us that would call ourselves Christians, you've been earning. You've been trying so hard to do the right things to get God to treat you the way that you want him to treat you, and you find it so empty. Are you the younger brother? Or the older brother? The second question is, who is God? Well, God in the story is the Father. A father who is willing to go to any length whatsoever to bring all of his family back home, even if that means humiliating himself, much like Jesus humiliated himself on the cross as people spat in his face and said, if you are who you say you are, why don't you come down from that cross? And it was not nails that held Jesus to a cross. It was his love for you that held him there. He would absorb all of my guilt and all of my shame and all of my regret, and all of your guilt, and all of your shame, and all of your regret, so that once and for all it could be paid for. Jesus would be humiliated for us, much like the Father would be humiliated to welcome his kids back home. And what's the point of the story? Well, the point is this, is that running won't work. Some of you have been running and you recognize it's not working. That religion isn't going to get you to where you need to be. You just have a different set of rules and rituals and rejection. At the end of the day, you're just as empty as you were before. And for others of us, it's just remembering that earning won't work. That your attempts to be good enough is never going to be what makes you right before your heavenly Father. But instead, there is a different way. There is a unique way, and it's not a religious way, it's a relational way. It's an invitation by Jesus, who has defeated death on your behalf, to simply follow him. Only a real relationship with Jesus will bring you what your heart desperately needs. And so here's the question today. Are you running or are you earning? Are you running or are you earning? Know that Jesus offers a better way. Jesus offers a better way. And the way by which you enter into that journey is simply by receiving God's gift of grace. It's literally what the father says to the older son in the parable when he says, "My son, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours." We have to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours, the younger brother, he was dead and is alive again. He was lost and he's found. Look up here, every eye. I want you to catch this, okay? Because this is the message that we missed growing up that we need to all hear today. This is the epicenter and the heart of Christian faith, okay? Look here. Jesus did not teach that the good are in and the bad are out. Jesus taught that the humble are in and the prideful are out. The older brother was good, and he still couldn't come to the party because he was too arrogant to think that he could simply be accepted as he was, that he didn't have to earn anymore. And the younger brother walked away from the party because he was too arrogant to realize what his heart really needed wasn't his father's stuff, but actually a relationship with his Father. And some of us need to stop trying to be so good all the time and start trusting in a God who's been good for us every single time. That what prevents you from walking into a life-giving relationship with God now and for all of eternity is not how good you are or what you've done or where you've been or what's been done to you. It's simply this. Are you willing to admit that you cannot make it there on your own and you need a Savior? The beautiful message of Jesus is it's been done for you. It's been paid for you. There's nothing you have to do but just receive the gift freely. Because when religion says achieve, Jesus says receive. And when religion says earn, Jesus says enjoy. He just wants a relationship with you. It's not about keeping the rules. It's not about following every ritual. It's not about rejecting your doubt. It's just about building a relationship with the creator of the universe that loves you this much, hands wide open, nails in them, Spirit through his side, declaring, I love you this much. So if you walked away from religion, good. Because Jesus would invite you to walk away too. And today, we invite you to walk towards Jesus. Jesus who would say that I am the way. The way you're looking for, it's in Jesus. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. So come, this is Jesus' invitation. Just come and follow me. Follow me with your pain. Follow me with your doubt. Follow me with your regret. Follow me with your wondering, I'm big enough to handle all of it, and you can belong here before you ever believe. Jesus introduces us to a relationship with God that isn't built on rules, but on grace. Unmerited, forever, unconditional love for you. And his resurrection proves it. It is not a theory, but a reality. That Jesus isn't just a good teacher with flowery, kind words, but he's demonstrated that everything he said you can take to the bank because he declared, I'm going to die, and 3 days later, I'm going to rise. And that's exactly what he did. And I just follow whatever a man who says that and does that says because I know he is capable. So here's the question. The question you've got to wrestle to the ground, and the invitation we give you here at Nona Church, not just today, but every single day. Will you start quitting religion and start walking in the way of Jesus? The way of Jesus allows us to embrace science and logic. You don't have to check your brain at the door to be a follower of Jesus. The way of Jesus allows questions to be asked without fear of being condemned or being shamed by people around you. The way of Jesus isn't afraid of doubt and wonder, but assumes that that's part of the journey of faith. And the way of Jesus invites you to belong before you ever believe. If you are not sure where you stand with Jesus, you have found the right place to be. Welcome to the family. You're around people who have been on that very journey in their own life. But here's the reality. Your first step to quitting religion is to accept Jesus' invitation. Because if you don't accept Jesus' invitation, here's what's at stake. You will remain a religious person. It'll either be the religion of running, and you'll find that to be empty, or it'll be your version of the religion of earning, and you will find that to be empty as well. And the only way out of that prison is to surrender and accept the invitation of Jesus to build a relationship with him. Over the next 3 weeks, we're going to talk about what that looks like. We're going to talk about how do you build a relationship with Jesus when it seems like there's a God to believe in that we don't see. The Bible that's hard to believe sometimes. In a church that we won't trust. Because let's be honest, the reason why we don't follow Jesus today probably has little to do with Jesus and everything to do with one of those three things, doesn't it? But sometimes the hardest thing about Christianity is Christians, right? But Jesus' invitation is to a life of flourishing, to a life of freedom, to a life of joy, to a life of honesty. And that's where freedom is found.